Right now, you are the only kind of human on Earth. That feels obvious. It feels like it has always been true. But for most of the time that creatures like you have walked this planet, it was not true at all. For hundreds of thousands of years, you would not have been alone. There were others. And what happened to them is one of the strangest, most unsettling stories in all of science. The real answer is far stranger than anything you learned in school. You have probably seen the timeline, the march of progress. A hunched ape slowly standing upright, getting taller, getting smarter, eventually becoming you. One clean line, one inevitable story. But that image is wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Human evolution was never a single line. It was a bush, a sprawling, branching, tangled bush. And at several points in the last million years, multiple different kinds of humans walked the earth at the same time. Think about that. Not just different cultures, not just different tribes, different species, different experiments in being human, all alive simultaneously, all breathing, hunting, loving, dreaming, and then, one by one, they disappeared. Who were they? The most famous are the Neanderthals. You have heard that name. You probably picture something brutish, something slow, something less. But that picture is outdated and it is wrong. Neanderthals buried their dead. They created pigments and decorated their bodies. They cared for their injured, keeping individuals alive for years who could not have survived without help. Their brains were, on average, slightly larger than yours. Researcher João Zilhau at the University of Barcelona has spent decades arguing with considerable evidence that Neanderthals were fully symbolic thinkers. They painted caves. They made jewelry from eagle talons. They were not your dull cousins. They were something else entirely, something genuinely other. And they are gone. Then there were the Denisovans. You may not have heard that name because science only discovered them in 2010. Not from a skeleton, from a single finger bone found in a cave in Siberia. A tiny fragment of bone that, when its DNA was extracted and sequenced by Svante Pabo and his team at the Max Planck Institute, turned out to belong to a human that no one had ever described before. A whole branch of humanity, previously unknown to science, revealed by a child's fingertip. Denisovans ranged across Asia. They interbred with modern humans in ways we are still unraveling, and then they too vanished. There were others. Homo heidelbergensis, the common ancestor you likely share with Neanderthals, roaming Europe and Africa 500,000 years ago. Homo naledi, discovered in a South African cave system in 2013 by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger and his team, a creature with a tiny brain and ancient features who may have deliberately placed their dead in deep, dark, almost inaccessible chambers. A ritual. In a species that was not supposed to be capable of ritual. Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit, a 3-foot-tall human who lived on the island of Flores in Indonesia and was still alive as recently as 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago. That is not ancient history. That is not prehistoric in the way people mean when they want to dismiss something as impossibly remote. 50,000 years ago, your direct ancestors were making art, telling stories, crossing oceans. And somewhere on a small island in Southeast Asia, a tiny human with a brain the size of an orange was doing the same. You were not alone. So what happened? This is where the science gets complicated and where the story gets uncomfortable, because the pattern is clear. Wherever modern humans went, the others disappeared. Not always immediately, not always violently, but the correlation is hard to ignore. Modern humans arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago. Neanderthals disappeared within a few thousand years. Modern humans moved deeper into Asia. The Denisovans were gone. Modern humans reached Flores. The hobbits vanished. Was it violence? Possibly, in some cases. There is archaeological evidence of conflict. There are sites where Neanderthal remains show trauma consistent with interpersonal violence. But outright warfare probably does not explain all of it. Was it disease? This is a serious hypothesis. When two populations that have been separated for hundreds of thousands of years suddenly come into contact, they carry different microbial worlds inside them. Modern humans may have carried pathogens that Neanderthals had never encountered and had no immunity to. The same thing happened on a massive scale when Europeans arrived in the Americas 10,000 years later. Populations collapsed not just from violence but from invisible biological invasion. Was it competition? This is the most likely large-scale answer. Not dramatic conflict, but quiet, grinding, ecological pressure. Modern humans may simply have been slightly better at finding food, slightly more flexible in their diets, slightly more effective at building social networks across long distances. In a world where everyone was already living close to the margins, those small advantages compounded over centuries and millennia. The others did not get wiped out in a single generation. They dwindled. Their populations fragmented. Their groups became too small to sustain themselves genetically. And eventually, the last members of each lineage died without descendants. But here is the part that changes everything. They did not entirely disappear. In 2010, Svante Pääbo's team at the Max Planck Institute announced something that shook the scientific world. When they compared the Neanderthal genome to the genomes of modern humans, they found something unexpected. People of non-African descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. The populations that became modern Europeans and Asians interbred with Neanderthals before the Neanderthals disappeared. Not just once, multiple times. In multiple locations, Neanderthals are not gone. A piece of them is inside you, right now. The Denisovans are in you too. People from Melanesia and Aboriginal Australians carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. Some of that DNA appears to confer real advantages. A gene variant found in Tibetan people today that allows them to live at high altitude without oxygen deprivation traces directly to the Denisovans. A gift passed through tens of thousands of years of human history from a species that does not exist anymore. You carry the dead with you. This is not metaphor, this is molecular biology. When you breathe in thin mountain air, when your immune system fights off a particular class of pathogen, when certain aspects of your hair and skin do what they do, some of those processes are running on ancient code. Code written by people who lived and died before your kind fully arrived. People who looked at the same stars you look at. People who held their children and lost their elders and wondered perhaps at what lay beyond the next valley. Researcher David Reich at Harvard Medical School, who has spent his career mapping ancient DNA, has said that the picture emerging from modern genetics is one of a world far more entangled and interconnected than anyone imagined. The story of human origins is not a story of one people replacing another. It is a story of mixture, of encounter, of absorption and transformation across vast stretches of time. And this reframes everything you thought you knew about being human. You are not the end point of a clean line. You are a braided river. Multiple currents merging and separating and merging again across 1,000,000 years. The others are not gone. They are dissolved into you. When you look at your hands, you are looking at something built partly from blueprints written by people who would not recognize you, who spoke no language you would understand, who lived in a world you would find alien. And yet here you are. There is something deeply strange about being the only surviving human species. For most of our evolutionary history, we were not alone. We shared this planet with others who were like us, but not us, who were close enough to recognize as kin, distant enough to be genuinely other. Science is only beginning to understand what those encounters looked like, what passed between groups who met at the edge of a forest 100,000 years ago. Whether there was curiosity, whether there was fear, whether there was something that looked from the outside like wonder. What is certain is this: they are part of you now. The Neanderthal who survived a brutal winter long enough to pass on her genes. The Denisovan who carried a variant that helped lungs pull oxygen from thin air. The unnamed ancestors of lineages we have not yet discovered, who may have left traces in your genome that science has not yet learned to read. You are the last human species, but you were not always alone, and the ones who walked beside you are not as gone as you thought. Tonight, when you look in the mirror, you are not looking at the end of the story. You are looking at the place where all those other stories merged. And that is stranger and more magnificent than any clean line of progress ever could have been.